Okay. Thank you very much, Barbara. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Christopher Butler. I'm Executive Director of Americans for Tax Reform, and I'm also a director of the Property Rights Alliance, which is a project of Americans for Tax Reform, which was founded just about 10 years ago. Americans for Tax Reform, people are surprised sometimes to learn that we actually have 3 international projects that we run at ATR, and it's an increasingly growing part of what we do. The first is the Property Rights Alliance that I just mentioned, which focuses on physical and intellectual property around the world, with a particular focus outside the United States. The other 2 pieces are something that we call the Taxpayer Leaders Forum and the Coalition Leaders Forum. The Taxpayer Leaders Forum is an organization, a loose association, rather is a better term, of folks that we work with around the world on issues pertaining to free markets from an activist perspective, as opposed to from a think tank perspective. So we're in the retail business, as our friend Troy Lanigan would say, as opposed to the wholesale business of ideas. The third piece of what we do internationally is the Coalition Leaders Forum. So a lot of people in this room may have been to the Wednesday meeting that we have in Washington. We actively promote this model around the world. We now have 22 meetings, with the most recent one being added in Greece. These are broad-based meetings of the Liberty community. Barbara hosts one in Vienna, for example, where everybody can try to work together as best we can to try to advance our policies by whatever small steps are necessary. And I mentioned a little bit about the property rights, about the Property Rights Alliance, but some of our specific projects are managing the Hernando de Soto Fellowship, which is the person that works for us that produces the International Property Rights Index, which is a marquee index of protection of intellectual property, physical property, the rule of law, and gender equity and property rights protections around the world. In addition, we organize several different policy conferences around the world, and we help to start up some think tanks and activist groups around the world that are also focused on property rights, in particular IP. Here's just an image of the 2017 International Property Rights Index, which we launched in Argentina last year. The next one will be launched in South Africa. We choose our locations based on what's going on in the news, in a lot of cases on where property rights are particular issues. South Africa is very current on land rights right now, very important, in addition to a lot of other things that are going on with IP, including plain packaging that we're going to talk about a little bit today. In addition, we have just signed a memorandum of understanding with Professor Walter Park of American University. We are going to be moving the patent index and the trademark index also under the property rights umbrella, which heretofore hasn't been able to be published other than once every 5 years. And I know a lot of people that are working in this field, that's an input into your metrics. So we're going to be able to update that more frequently now. This is a short sampling of many of our partner organizations that we work with through the International Property Rights and the preparation of the International Property Rights Index. Now, I just want to make a quick argument for from a libertarian perspective about why intellectual property rights are important and worthy of being protected, and why they're a real property right. I know this is still a matter of debate within the libertarian community, but I think there's a number of people that have made different arguments about this, but I really like Lysander Spooner's argument about IP, and he uses the analogy of a gold mine, where there's a problem of knowledge of where the gold is. And when someone possesses knowledge of where the gold is, that's a valuable right. That's a valuable piece of information that can be used to create actual wealth and therefore property. So I want you to imagine something like the situation on the right side of the screen, where we have somebody that owns a piece of property and they're digging into their own property for gold. And they dig down and they dig down and they come to a point down low where they don't find any gold, but they dig right up to the property line and are able to see that their neighbor has has gold on his property. Now, that property owner then has a piece of extremely valuable information. So that analogy shows, and now while there's a couple of different property rights that come into play here, it shows the intrinsic value of a piece of property, a piece of intellectual property that's really easy to understand. The rational way that would be handled is that property right owner would enter into a contract with his neighbor so that both could profit from that information. And that's something that indicates something about the way property rights should work. I have a little quote from Murray Rothbard here as well at the bottom. You can read for yourself. The UN has stated that property rights are actually human rights in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, to share in scientific advancement and its benefits, and everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. We use this argument a lot when we're talking to people in undeveloped countries about why property rights are so important, intellectual property rights are so important. When IP is protected, inventors, artists, and brands are incentivized to compete in the marketplace. In the United States, 30% of employment and 38% in the EU are tied to IP-intensive sectors. And I think most people in this room already know this, but all three types of IP that we talk about, patent, trademark, and copyright, all play a role in this. I think sometimes trademarks are excluded from this when people think about the value that's generated. But these sectors in the EU and the US actually have the largest impact in terms of employment. And here are some correlations. These are taken from our index again, between protection of IP rights and other indicators of competitive economic investments. You see, well, you can read about entrepreneurships at the top, civic activism, researchers and research and development, GDP per capita, and R&D expenditure. IP protections protect risky investments. This is related to patents in medicine. New medicine requires 10 years of development, costs $2.5 billion, and 90% fail to reach the market. The ability to own the end product through patent protection incentivizes continued drug development. There's simply no way to do this in the free market absent patent protections. There are a lot of directly harmful IP policies, and we're going to talk about some of them on the panel today. One is compulsory licensing. Compulsory licensing is kind of an oxymoron. You shouldn't have to enter into a contract with somebody against your will. It doesn't really make any sense. That affects both the music and the film industry. There's official and quasi-official counterfeit tolerance. In a lot of corrupt regimes around the world and in some of the world's largest economies. Recently, anti-monopolistic pretenses are used to invalidate patents from major countries in the world. This is an increasingly large problem in some countries in Asia. And then there's direct state theft and blackmail of patents and other intellectual property. And finally, trademark destruction. Barbara had mentioned a little bit about our plain packaging letter that we've talked about. I think most people are probably familiar with plain packaging, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But it's affected primarily so far in the world tobacco and medicine to some degree. But what we find is that just like in the cases of a lot of taxes, the first people to be lined up are usually the tobacco and alcohol and other disfavored industries, but eventually they come for everybody else. But plain packaging destroys trademark. I mean, one shouldn't be coy about it. It absolutely destroys trademark because in these cases, you've already removed the ability of any tobacco company to advertise using their trademark in any way, to do anything else that's useful. And when you finally remove it from the packaging, you've completely destroyed the value. So it is a destruction of trademark. I have a quote from the Minister of Health in France here. Official sales of cigarettes actually increased in France. The plain packaging did not reduce the official sales of tobacco. So it doesn't actually even work. And I think we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail. I think we've just handed out our coalition letter. on plain packaging. Okay, it's going out right now. But in our coalition on plain packaging that we've handed out, or that we've been recruiting signers around the world, we urge the WHO and government around the world to stop infringing on intellectual property rights with plain packaging policies. And again, so far it's hit tobacco. We have no particular love of tobacco, but it's usually the first place it goes. Second, we have seen some overtures towards alcohol in Southeast Asia, and in terms of medications in Latin America as well, in terms of plain packaging. So the letter also mentions some of the failures of plain packaging. In addition to doing violence to trademarks from a philosophical basis, it also hasn't worked with in terms of accomplishing its stated objective, and has led to widespread counterfeit and other types of problems. With that, I will hand it on to our first speaker, Tanja Prcnik. Tanja is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. She's president and co-founder of the Visio Institute, a think tank in Slovenia, and co-author of the Human Freedom Index.
Thank you. So thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not a smoker. I hadn't had a cigarette in my entire life. So you wonder why am I speaking today on tobacco control law? Well, basically because I am a staunch defender of human rights, among them economic liberties. And for any of us who care about human freedoms, looking at laws like this one, the one that I'm going to speak today, the one from Slovenia, we get frustrated, angry, because there are a lot of provisions in these laws that go against what we believe, and we should stand up, even though we are not smokers, and it doesn't affect us directly. I believe we should stand up more fiercely, and hopefully then we can reverse some of these laws that are trampling on rights of the smokers and other people that are in business of producing tobacco products. Slovenia passed a recent law that was passed last year in 2017. It was in consequence of the directive that came from the EU. And when we joined the EU in 2004, I thought, okay, we have one layer of bureaucrats and people telling us what to do and what not to do, and now we are getting another layer from Brussels. I thought that's it. We cannot get worse than that. Actually, these days we are noticing that our bureaucrats, decision makers, policy makers in Slovenia are getting even worse than people in Brussels. So basically, what we are getting at the end, after the directive is passed, and then they have opportunity to pass a law, they go to the fullest extent of that directive, sometimes even further. And that is very dangerous, because basically they are taking directives that come from Brussels, not just as a guidelines, but as a mandate or as a rubber stamp to go even further with regulations. And one of these examples is the tobacco control law that was passed last year. There are a couple of provisions in this legislation that are not so controversial, and they are listed here. So, we could justify that there is a ban on smoking in closed public or working spaces, a ban on advertising of tobacco-related products, e-cigarettes, when it comes to movies, and other material that target or they are designed for the minors. As well as we can say, okay, government wants more money, so they are increasing and earmarking excise taxes. Okay, we can accept that. But when it comes to other provisions like, sorry, I went too far. So when it comes to product, when they define how product can look like or how product cannot look like. In case of our law, they they specify that minimum 65% of the packaging needs to have health warnings and images, gruesome images of what can happen if you smoke. They equated e-cigarettes with or without nicotine, as well as herbal cigarettes with tobacco and tobacco-related products. So they said this is for us equal, and we're going to treat them under the law equally. They banned all flavors that could be added to these products, like vanilla or mint. In terms of sales, they banned all vending machines that, I live actually in Austria, and in Austria you have on the streets, you have these vending machines where you can buy cigarettes. In Slovenia, you will never find a vending machine where you can buy cigarettes. As well as they banned I didn't even know how to define this in English, but basically any portable space that could sell cigarettes. So if you have a van, and you do your business out of the van, you have a license and everything, you cannot sell cigarettes from that van just because it can be moved, it can be physically moved, or any, a cart or anything like that. They also banned any online or mobile sales, including cross-border. We are today, we can identify ourselves when we pay taxes, we can identify ourselves that this is really us. So we are, 30 or 40 or 50 years old. So why cannot we do the same with online sale of, online purchase of tobacco products? But of course, government will not go that far to ease us purchase of these products. They also banned, so if an establishment has a space where smokers can go and enjoy their cigarettes, a bartender cannot, basically he's banned from going to that space to serve any foods and drinks. So people that smoke can go into that space only to smoke, because if the bartender goes into that area where this designated for smokers, and if the inspector comes and catches him, the establishment would be fined, the bartender would be fined, and actually the customers as well would be fined for being served food and drinks. In terms of advertising, displaying, and promotion, the law bans any direct or indirect advertising. Furthermore, it bans advertising these products the products that could, with its look and usage, encourage consumption of tobacco-related products and e-cigarettes. I don't even know what that means. Basically, they put it in the law, so it's kind of like, opened question for them, so they could determine what could be these products. They also they banned displays on the point of sale. In terms of donations and sponsorship, that is very important for all individuals and organizations on our side of the debate. They banned all donations and sponsorships of events, activities by an individual or institution with an aim, effect, or possible promotion of tobacco-related products or e-cigarettes. I actually don't know. I didn't talk to the industry lately. I'm not sure that they can actually in Slovenia support anyone at the moment without being in danger of getting a hefty fine. I don't know if there is a way to go around this provision. And the last point is plain packaging. They have introduced, it's going to go into effect on January 1st, 2020. So Slovenia joined Australia, France, Hungary, Ireland, New Zealand, Norway, and the UK in passing such legislation. And how they defined it. They defined it for two clusters. One is cigarettes. They said, okay, we are going to determine the shape of the box. There should be minimum 20 cigarettes in the box. You cannot have less. we're going to determine the color of the box and any part of it, as well as the wrap. We're going to tell you what material you can produce these materials out of. There should be no logo, of course. You can spell out a brand and type of cigarettes only, and only once. So on the whole package, you can do this only once. So you are not allowed to do it twice, different sides of the package. They are also saying, okay, cigarettes can be only in white, so they can be only white, and they cannot be shiny. They cannot be, the color cannot shine, so it cannot shine. And but they said, okay, the part that you put in the mouth, that can be in light brown. Okay, we're gonna give you that. And the second group is rolled tobacco. They said, okay, we're going to determine the shape of a pack. We're going to tell you minimum quantity in grams, how much you should have it in that pack. Again, the color of the pack, material of the pack, no logo, only spelled out brand and type of tobacco, and leaves and filters that are used for rolling tobacco. They can be enclosed, but they cannot be seen, meaning when you purchase that pack, they have to be hidden inside the pack. God forbid that you can see leaves or filters. And they end with an article, which is really interesting. And it says something like that: a tobacco brand may be registered under a separate law in Slovenia, the intellectual property law, though this particular law that I'm talking about today is justifiably prohibiting the usage of a brand. So they're saying, okay, you can register it, but under this law, we are telling you cannot use it. Sorry. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next, I'd like to ask Christopher Snowdon to speak. He's head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. His research focuses on social freedoms, prohibition, and policy-based evidence. He's a regular columnist for EA Magazine and the Spectator Health blog, and an occasional contributor to Spiked City AM and The Telegraph. He often appears on TV and radio discussing social and economic issues. He is the editor of the Nanny State Index and author of 4 books: Selfishness, Greed, and Capitalism, The Art of Suppression, The Spirit Level Delusion, and Velvet Glove Iron Fist. He has also written more than a dozen reports for the Institute of Economic Affairs, including Drinking Fast and Slow, The Proof of the Pudding, Denmark's Fat Tax Fiasco, Cheapest Chips, Sock Puppets, and Closing Time, Who's Killing the British Pub?
Thank you. Yes, I've actually written another book since that bio was written, Killjoys, which is in line with what Tanja's just been talking about. As Chris has already alluded to, you can't take for granted, if you're addressing a room of libertarians, that everybody is on side with IP in the first place. At the Institute of Economic Affairs, every year we have a large group of interns join us for the summer, and we generally have a debate between the staff. Because we have 1 or 2 people on the staff who don't believe in intellectual property rights. We do always, on my side of the argument, we always do win it, but there are a significant minority of people who don't like the idea for various reasons. I think I'm familiar with the anti-IP arguments. I just wanted to go through them briefly. One of them seems to be about the intangible nature of ideas and inventions, and the kind of stuff covered by IP. The idea that, if I have a tree in my garden and I chop it down and turn it into a chair, that is somehow mine because it's tangible and I made it, it's my tree, and the rest of it, people can get that idea. Whereas just coming up with a melody for a song or coming up for an idea of an invention, clearly it is a less tangible thing. But that doesn't mean it's a man-made idea, or at least if IP is a man-made idea, it's no more man-made than normal property rights. And normal property rights are the absolute bedrock of the market economy. They are not natural. They're not handed down by God. And indeed, if we were communists, we wouldn't have any concept of private property rights. There are tribes of people out in the world who have no concept of private property rights. Now, it is a man-made concept. IP is equally a man-made concept. The real question is, why have we made the concept? And it's the justification for IP is identical to the justification for having the state enforce private property rights of a chair or a bottle of water or whatever it may be, and that is to give people security in their work, to make sure we reward people for their work, to keep the system fair, and to foster innovation. And I will come back to that point. The other argument is that in some way it's not fair. If you look particularly at inventions, there's over the years there have been 2 or more people inventing the same thing at much the same time, but somebody just gets there first, and isn't it unfair that the person who came second gets no reward for that? Well, in some cosmic sense, perhaps it is unfair. Perhaps it is it's bad for them, clearly, that they spent all this time, and somebody else has pipped them to the post. But really, what is the alternative? Why should people get a reward just for participating? It comes back again to incentivizing people to innovate. The fact that you do get potentially a large reward from being the first person to come up with an invention is precisely the reason people will go about investing in themselves and spending time doing these things in the first place. Another argument is that in many instances, IP rights are simply not needed. It's been put to me that there will always be people who will want to play the piano and write songs. There'll always be people who will be making videos on YouTube. And if you're happy just watching amateur videos on YouTube, that's probably fair enough. But there is not going to be a film industry putting millions and millions of dollars into you if that film is going to be distributed essentially for free as soon as it comes out. The music industry has seen that very much so already. So yeah, there are always going to be people writing songs. Some of those songs might be quite good, but there will not be a music industry to take these people on, sign them, give them a record contract, and help them go touring around the world. And the final point, which I think does actually have some merit, is that IP rights can be abused. The very fact that they are intangible and the rules can change according to lobbying from various vested interests do mean that they can be problematic. I think there was a case last year of somebody who bought up the rights to a medicine and was trying to charge what appeared to most people to be extortionate prices for their use. It is, I think most people see the ethical problems with life-saving drugs being effectively denied people because of the high price caused by patent protection. And there is certainly an issue with copyright law being extended. The length of time since somebody dies keeps going up and up and up because the Disney Corporation want to keep Mickey Mouse in copyright, and the estate of Elvis Presley are very keen not to have his back catalogue go out for free. I accept those issues, but I think it's more a matter of detail than it is principle. I think the basic principle that you need to protect people's ideas and give people patents is sound. We can quibble about the details, but the basic principle, I think, is robust. When it comes to branding, I find doing these annual debates, the one aspect of this that the anti-IP people find least easy to attack is branding. I think most people get that somebody passing off a product as if it was made by somebody else, fake Nike clothes or whatever it may be, that is essentially fraud. Nobody benefits from that breach of IP other than the black marketeers. And brands are very important, and like a lot of things that socialists criticize for being a privilege to business, it's actually the consumer who primarily benefits from them. Some of the benefits of having brands, particularly well-advertised brands, are that it saves the consumer time. It's a certain quality. It's an assurance of quality that you more or less know a well-known brand that you've seen advertised is going to be good. Now, why do you know that? Partly because the company has a huge amount of money invested in that brand. So it incentivizes the company to make sure that quality is maintained. If you didn't have brands and if you didn't have advertising, you just have a whole load of fly-by-night companies putting stuff on the market, there would be no need to have any kind of assurance of quality. There would be no assurance of quality, and there would be very little consistency. Another advantage of brands is that the consumers actually get a kind of welfare benefit. It actually improves their well-being, even if the unbranded product is of identical quality to the branded product. It makes the person feel better to know that they're using something that they've seen some celebrity use. You might say that's just a psychological effect, and of course it is, but it's none the worse for that. If people get a benefit from consuming a product which they perceive to be of higher quality, even if it's not necessarily of higher quality. If somebody wants to pay twice as much for aspirin because it's a well-known brand, even though everybody knows that all aspirin is exactly the same, then so be it. Now, if you look at the illicit drugs market, you can see some of the problems that not having brands brings about. Now, there are all sorts of problems with the illicit drugs market, the lack of regulation and so on. But the lack of branding is a part of it. There is, generally speaking, no brands when it comes to narcotics. There is actually one interesting exception, which is ecstasy, which often will have a kind of logo on the pill. Often, incidentally, the logo is ripped off from somebody else's company, Mitsubishi or Ferraris or what have you. But there is sometimes branding on ecstasy. But of course, because the IP rights can't be enforced, because it's a legal market, other people very quickly use the same logo on their inferior products, and we're back to square one. But you don't typically have brands. If there are brands, they get copied, and the problems are as you would expect. There is total lack of consistency from one drug to the next. There is no assurance of quality. In 2015, the British government put together a little report trying to estimate the size of the cannabis market in the UK and estimating how much tax would be raised if it were legalized. This report was never published, but it did eventually surface. And one of the interesting things in it, I thought, was they asked the question of, if we have a legal market, what would the regulation be? Would we allow branding? And they pointed out in this document that if you didn't have branding, if you had effectively plain packaging for cannabis, there would be less of a differentiation between the kind of residual black market and the legal product. Now, interesting that they pointed that out, because at that very time, the British government was also bringing in plain packaging for tobacco, and one of the arguments against that is it would do precisely that. It would turn the whole market into a kind of grey market, and nobody would know what was what. The effects of plain packaging, which I think is coming in 3 or 4 countries, and apart from Australia, the evidence is quite recent. But certainly the outcome in Australia has been to fuel the illicit market for 2 primary reasons. Leaving aside the fact that the tobacco industry itself doesn't have an incentive to protect its own brands, which incidentally is another important thing about IP. You get companies effectively enforcing the law themselves. It saves the police doing it. They have every incentive to stop somebody passing off a fake product as their own. But leaving that aside, there's been 2 ways in which it's fueled the illicit market. Firstly, by having all the packs exactly the same, except for the name of the product, which has to be in exactly the same font and font size, the packs are all absolutely identical. This lowers the barriers of entry, it lowers the costs somewhat for counterfeiters, because instead of having to produce lots of different brands, they have to just produce the same one and change the name. And the second thing, and this goes back to what I was saying about consumer well-being through the satisfaction of consuming a known brand, is, there does seem to be some evidence that smokers enjoy their cigarettes less when they're in a plain pack. They've done surveys, and they've found that people perceive, quite wrongly, that the quality of the product itself has deteriorated. Now, anti-smoking campaigners think this is a jolly good thing. Anything that makes smoking less pleasurable has got to be good. In the normal course of public policy, we consider reducing consumer welfare as being a bad thing. But moreover, the aim of the policy supposedly was not to marginally reduce the welfare of smokers, who, by the way, are continuing to smoke. It's to have some effect on non-smokers so they don't take up smoking. And the brands and the logos and colors on cigarette packs have approximately no effect on non-smokers because they're not interested in smoking in the first place. So because smokers in many cases actually are quite keen on their brands to a greater or lesser extent, certainly not to the extent that they're going to either decide to continue smoking or decide to quit on the basis of it, but insofar as they have some mild preference at least for having a branded packet than a non-branded packet, once you get rid of cigarette branding, the only way people can get branded packets is by going on the illicit market. So in Britain we can go to Belgium and we can get the cigarette packs that we know and love, and this is the most interesting thing, I think, is there's been an influx of totally fake brands, which every consumer must realize are fake because everyone knows that plain packaging is in effect. But they've been completely made up. There was one in Australia that got a non-trivial market share called Manchester. There's never been a brand of cigarettes called Manchester, but it had a nice red packet, had no health warnings on it, and people preferred to buy that than they did the plain packs. So it has fueled the black market in several different respects, and it's all as a result of IP being undermined and branding being essentially banned.
Thank you very much. Up next, we'll turn to Michael Jäger, the Secretary General of the Taxpayers Association of Europe since 1996, and since 2011, also Chief Executive Manager of the European Economic Senate, the network of leading corporates in Europe. Since 1991, Michael Jäger is working for the Bavarian Taxpayers Association, and since October 2015 is Vice President. He's an entrepreneur, consultant, and author working as a watchdog of taxpayers and a fighter for less taxation. Fighting for less taxation, more individual freedom, and a free market economy with publications, articles, statements, and lectures and matters pertaining to taxation, public spending, agricultural and structural reforms, funds, deregulation, privatization, and institutional reforms. Michael.
You know, it's the problem that almost everything is said, but not by me. So, but I changed completely. So, what you mentioned, that's by heart, I'm fighting for competition. I think if we want to protect brands and intellectual property rights, it's also a question to protect competition and innovation. And what we see on the European level, the European Union is more and more regulating and more harmonizing, and that's a big problem. They do not realize the right face of the problem, but they want to go in the detail. Tobacco is one very bad example. I will explain it a little bit later. And for sure, we need a framework. For sure, we need rules. And for sure we need fair competition. But what we miss, if you look to the court decisions of European Court, it's mostly against corporates. So it's not in favor of innovation. And so I think that's one big mistake, that the European Union is not realizing how important it would be to protect innovation and to boost innovation in Europe, not only in Europe, worldwide. What is also a problem for us, for sure, is it's not fair if we have different treatment in taxation. So if you treat all people the same, everyone the same, it's okay. If you have a zero taxation for reinvestment, such as in Estonia, it's fine. Why not? Why not? But if you treat people not equally, like foreigners get a better tax climate than your own people, so it's unfair. So for sure we are not in favor of unfair competition, but I think it's much easier to change these things than to harmonize. And we think very good and bad examples that the European Union is developing in the wrong direction. So the idea of it's a peace project. If I explain to my children we do not need to change currency, if we all know before the refugee crisis we could pass completely Europe without a passport, no border controls. We had growth and lot of growth and more wealth in Europe, and it's a peace project. But it's developing in the wrong direction. Instead of to assist. The court decisions are against entrepreneurs and also the behavior of European Commission also. So there's one very bad example You don't know it, but you eat it if you're in Europe, in Austria, in Bavaria. It's a kind of bread, like an angle. It's very nice, it's very good, tasty, and then the original comes from Kornspitz. So it's called Kornspitz. And the problem Mr. Augendobler had, and then he went to court, that people went inside to a bakery and said, listen, I want a Kornspitz. And they didn't use the ready mix for this bread. They did it themselves, something different, looking similar, but it was not Kornspitz. And the court finally was deciding against this corporate. Why? Because people entered these baker shops and said, listen, I want a Kornspitz, and they are used to eat this wrong mixture. And so the brand itself was not protected anymore. I could not understand it. I was so angry after the court decision. I was believing in the court, but in reality, it's burning the innovation and destroying. But for sure, most of the serious bakers use his mixture because it's a better quality. But it would be the same if you change, if you look inside, for instance, my Audi, inside you will find for the engine Bosch. They produce a lot of components. I exchange now a label Michael Jäger, and then I'm allowed to copy Bosch. It would not be possible. But that's the wrong approach of the European Union. They didn't protect an entrepreneur, and it's really, really bad. That's one example. Another example was already mentioned, tobacco. And tobacco makes me very, very angry because it shows how unfair corporates are treated. And if you look to the first proposal with this plain packaging, even no more brand should be on the package. Can you imagine? So Marlboro and Philip Morris, no more corporate brand. And they wanted to harmonize, and they did a lot of harmonization, size, packaging, and the content and product itself, the components too. And I think there's no expertise and no, competence at the European Commission to harmonize. They have no competence in tobacco. For sure, I'm against. My mother, she died because of smoking and cancer. But it was her free decision to smoke or not to smoke. She knew about it, that it's not very healthy. And it's also not a serious discussion. A very good example is Germany. We have a tobacco tax brings our finance minister 40.7 billion a year plus VAT on top. So it's about 17.5 billion. And so they take the money, but they are officially against smokers. It's not clever. They increase the costs, and then they are more than happy to get these billions in. If it would be a serious discussion, they should spend all the money in education and other things, and also as an alternative for shops. Because what we also miss, if you look to these things, is impact assessment. There is no impact assessment. We know that tobacco is not healthy, but if you see how many jobs are related to the tobacco industry, if you look to our fuel stations, they do not make the biggest profit by gasoline. They sell Kornspitz and say Marlboro and all other things, and that's the benefit. If they are not allowed to continue to sell these products, where's the alternative for them? Or go to France, newspaper shops and coffee shops. How to solve the problem? It's more than I think it's more than 1 million people direct and indirect related to the tobacco industry. So if you want to fight, it's a decision. If it's a society decision against smokers, but I think prohibition was not good in the US. It was increasing the costs, and it is not very smart and clever, and it is also destroying innovation. If you look now, how smart and clever Philip Morris invented IQOS. It's an innovation, not an innovation by European Commission. They spend a huge amount of money to make smoking less or more healthier. How to say healthier? But yes, but it's very clever. I'm sure that American tobacco will follow, and that's innovation. So it was possible to reduce the cancer risk of smoking. So it's not by European Commission, it's by innovation. And that's why we have to protect innovation. And also we should do it, support it, and we should have some tax incentives maybe. And there are also very good examples. If you go to Georgia, Moldova, if you want a change, if you want innovation, tax-free areas and maybe a tax credit if you spend much more money in innovation, and you can bring the innovation and the development in the right direction. But that's what we miss in Germany. What was the reaction if we realized that Estonia reinvested profits are tax-free? What was the reaction? Commission was angry and said it's unfair. It's a zero taxation. It's not true. As long as you keep the money working in your corporate, you have a zero taxation, what is very good for young, new, developing countries. It's a very smart solution. If you take the money out, you will be taxed. As long as you invest, it's not taxed. So it's very smart, and Commission reaction was it's an unfair tax competition. It's not unfair, because if you as a German or my Swedish friends go, a lot of Swedish and by the way Finnish corporates went to Estonia, let's say all treated equal. If you treat people not equal, then it's not fair, but it was a very clever, smart solution, and also from our European perspective, how to solve the Greece crisis. Barbara and I, we know how, but bankruptcy, it was not done, but how to solve the problem. If make an innovation cluster increase and a tax-free area, and not to spend every year billions to Greece without sense. It's burned, the money is burned. So that's what we want and what we need. And let's say more Europe where it's necessary and less Europe where it's possible. And there are some fields like defense and the refugee problem. Could only be solved on a European level. It could not be solved by the Germans. I know why all these people went from Turkey to Germany, because we have a lot of services, social services and social payments, and for that reason, for sure, they go to Germany. But it's our own problem. So we are more than happy that the new Chancellor in Austria has a new policy, and it could be a role model for Europe too, because alone you cannot solve the problem. But the other principle is less Europe. What is completely forgotten now is the so-called principle of subsidiarity. First, you take care yourself. My home village has to take care itself. Then we go to Bavaria, then we go to Germany, and then we go to European Union. But now it's vice versa. We want to regulate everything in Europe, what is happening in my home village. It's the wrong approach. And the same for corporates. You should not regulate everything. If we have a problem, then we should just ensure that we say all follow to the law. And my problem is like the euro and banking crisis. Look what happened at the European Parliament. You had 2-pack, 6-pack, a lot of new things. If everybody would have followed the Maastricht criteria, we would not have had a problem. But what we do on a European level, if we have a problem, new laws, new regulation. But things become not better if you have new regulation, if you do not follow to it. For that reason, I think it's up to us that we start to fight for innovation, and what you did now with this paper, it's an excellent idea that we show at least that we are not in favor of this regulation, and it's important, but it's our own failure. If you go to the webpage of the European Union, you have now almost 460 consultations. I just want to ask Europeans, not our friends from the US, in how many consultations you were participating the last years? Be honest. We do not participate in mostly. I asked my entrepreneurs in Germany, and that's what I do now with our Taxpayers movement. They have to participate. Why? Because you have these so-called good social people. They participate in these consultations. And that's why we have this ugly plain packaging. If we do not participate in and fight for our own rights, you must be sure that these people who are against everything will not support our idea of free market society. And that's a big problem. The failure is ourselves. We are making the failure because we do not monitor what is going on in Brussels. We have to start earlier. If you have a directive, everybody is yelling, unbelievable, plain packaging, REACH, chemical regulation. It's too late. It's much too late. If it's decided on the national and European level, it's done. We cannot stop it. We can maybe some fine-tuning. So we have to start much earlier. Please participate in these consultations. And if you participate, you become, I'm gray and let's lose my hair, so you will have the same problem maybe. But we should participate in consultations. If we do not do it, we should not wonder if European Union is coming with complete crazy approaches. Because we are the economy, we represent an economy, and the entrepreneurs, my small and medium entrepreneurs, also the big, what you mentioned, European Economic Senate, the people from Audi and the German railway and so on, they have no idea to participate in these consultations normally. But we should do it. We should do it because it's not enough if our industry chamber or your Austrian chamber, it's one voice. It's only counted as one voice. So if your excellent chamber is participating, if our Bund der Industrie, the industrial association is participating, it's one voice. So we have really to motivate and to educate people to understand these consultations and to answer the right way. Then it will be less risky for us. So that's what I learned now. It's not easier. The world is becoming much more complicated, and European Union is not as easy as it should be. Maybe therefore we have to cut it down where it's possible, and we have to fight for innovation and to protect economic freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the question of the point about harm reduction and technological development is a really important one, because you have a situation where you've removed the ability to advertise, even the brands in these places, and then you have technological advances that allow these companies to produce something that's dramatically less harmful for the free market to be able to do what governments have never been able to do over 50 years of regulation. And ironically, it's just stopped, because there's no ability to advertise or brand the new products that are coming out. Somebody once told me that it's like if we went to a magical island where everybody smoked coffee leaves every morning, and everybody was dying of cancer. And the ship arrived, and they said, "Oh my gosh, everyone's dying of cancer because we are smoking these coffee leaves. Do you have any idea what we could possibly do to stop this? Like 30% of our population is dying." And your answer is heavily regulate it, eliminate branding, instead of telling them, well, you can grind it up and put it in a coffee maker. Yeah. I think Barbara's going to wrap up, and then we're going to do questions. Richard.
Well, thanks very much. Being here among like-minded friends, we sometimes are not of the same opinion. And I know that there are groups within the libertarian world who do not believe in the protection of property rights, or especially of IP rights per se. And I think it's also our task to openly debate this among us, not publicly probably, because we should be seen as one strong movement, but at least convince those within our groups who do not believe in the protection of IP. And I think we simply have to remind them that property is the bedrock and the protection thereof of a healthy economy, as the Austrian school has already explained it a couple of hundred years ago, and that it is the basis for capitalism. Without protection of property rights, no capitalism is possible. And after all, we all love this. First thing. Second thing, under the disguise of protecting the consumer, the EU is coming up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Many of them have been discussed already, whether it's all those new tobacco laws, whether it's plain packaging, and also whether it's fighting IP, the rights for IP. So this plethora of regulatory changes that we see these days is something that and thank you very much, Mike, for bringing this up. that we have to bring up in this consultation processes. And I think this is a challenge for us. And I hope that Daniel will cover that tomorrow in the workshop of how we can get to this point that we will be, the think tanks in the respective countries will be part of those consultation processes as well, because we need to coordinate. It's not only about the division of labor, but it's about coordination as well, at least among us. And then lastly, it's the cost of compliance that is very significant, and it's raising. And the new regime marks will be a major overhaul for this entire groups. Let me just think into the future. So tobacco is on the plate. Pharma is on the plate already. The next that will be on the plate will be sugary drinks, wine, and all kinds of spirits that will be on the plate. And of course, it will be music, it will be the film industry, it will be arts as well. So I think it's a very wide spectrum that we have to look at, and we have been focusing so far in the recent years on tobacco and pharma. But I think we need to take one step, or look at least one step ahead, and be prepared what we are looking at, or what we will be facing. And after all, it's all about jobs creation and innovation. And I think this is the only argument that each and every politician will understand, because they all need jobs and they all believe in jobs and they think they create the jobs, which we know that they don't, but eventually this is the point. And if we do not follow through that and step on their toes and tell, you do not create jobs, you are not innovative. Because if we look at the innovation maps of Europe, and you all know those charts, how the heat map went red in terms of, worse and worse and worse in the past 3 years because of all those regulations, then, this is scientific evidence, this evidence on the jobs front. So this is the way we can beat them. And, there is good news, for example, at least it is possible to reverse laws and turn back time. I mean, this little example in Austria, when we banned the ban on tobacco, or especially on use of tobacco and smoking, was the first step. And many of our surrounding countries were looking at what the Freedom Party did by pushing through, and I'm glad that we were able to ban this. And so it's not all lost, and I would like to end on a positive note, because we all were very critical. We can turn back the time and we can reverse those laws, but it's upon us to stick together. And the good news is, while we were talking, the first signatures came on those letters. So it's good news if we stick together and continue the fight. I want to keep you longer because you need to run the...
Okay, thanks. Yes, Michael just had one more comment he wanted to make real quick.
Barbara, thank you very much. I just wanted to add, for sure, there's a different approach between some groups to protect IP or not. But there's one thing what we also miss. I know it from a lot of SMEs, the costs, if you want to bring something to register patents, European patents or national patents, are much too high. That also could be a possibility. And it depends which, if you're a monopolist, for sure, you need an access to data if you want innovation, and if you would look to the Microsoft world. If Microsoft started, everything was protected, and it was opened, then you had competition. That's the normal way. You start from up to down. That's the normal way in economic theory. So you start with a high brand, Sometimes, if you look to nylon and jeans, it's vice versa. But if you go through, you start also with special things in your car, airbags. First the S-Class, Audi, Mercedes, and then it goes down to a smart Fiat 500. So that's a normal way. So it's available. It will be, and then so for that reason, it's from my point of view, it would be important that we fight to cut down costs to register patents. And you're also completely right. This consumer protection. It's crazy groups. And if you remember what I said when we started with tobacco, I said we will be followed by sugar and for sure alcohol. And if you look now to UK, it's just to tax people. It's to educate people, and I dislike it. They should start with children. That's what we can do in the kindergarten. But I do not want to say that people, that the government, the state is taking care of my whole life. It's our private decision. And if it's really crazy. It's starting now in Germany with the sugar. Sugar is much more risky than cocaine now. If you read, it's crazy. And it's a consumer protection movement, these groups. And also some other things, if it comes to pollution of air, it's very crazy. But if you're interested, I can tell you some stories about what we do wrong in Germany now with the pollution thing.
Thank you. We're going to go just a few minutes late so that we can take some questions, and then we'll cut the coffee break short after the keynote. So I think, Richard, you're in.
Tanja, I particularly liked your remarks about tobacco. I don't think our side does enough exposing who are the financial beneficiaries of these types of restrictions. In the U.S., we had a lot of restrictions on alcohol consumption in the southern U.S. And then a number of studies, and a book came out called Baptist and Bootleggers, showing where the bootleggers, the people who provide the black market in alcohol, were in alliance with the Southern Baptists who were against drinking alcohol, and they supplied them, the bootleggers supplied the Baptist preachers with a lot of revenue to make sure, the people continue to vote against having the free market in alcohol. I remember, this goes back, must have been 17, 18 years ago, and New York City greatly increased the cigarette tax. It was up like $3.30. And my son at that point was going to a prep school in New York City, but we lived in Northern Virginia. In Virginia, the cigarette tax was 25 cents. And when they increased the tax in New York City up to $3.30, my son immediately said to me, I think he was 13 years old, he said, "Dad, I've got a great idea. Why don't we fill up the trunk with cigarettes, and I'll go up there and pedal around the school, and I can make a fortune." So I figured every 13-year-old in America had figured this out. Now, who had the economic interest in New York of the high tax? Well, it was actually a lot of these small retailers, a lot of these little shops were no longer paying a tax, and they got much greater margins, and of course the mafia and other groups. And I was curious with the people who are pressing for the increase in restrictions on tobacco. I'm one who follows the money. Who was going to benefit? And if you start exposing the people who benefit, you can often defeat these things.
Well, actually, in case of Slovenia, the answer is a little bit unexpected. The beneficiaries are not the ones pushing for such regulation. The people that are pushing and the strongest advocates are bureaucrats at Ministry of Health. They are lifelong bureaucrats that just want to regulate everything, and they are so powerful that not even a prime minister can stand up to them.
Okay, so there you're saying it's basically public choice economics, where the bureaucrats want to increase the size of their own staffs and their own power, and hence their own salaries, by having a much bigger bureaucracy.
There's a zealotry here, though, and it's beyond that.
Exactly. There are a couple of layers, and it's just their ambition to impose certain type of lifestyle on other people. And this is, of course, backed up, it hasn't been mentioned on this panel, by the efforts that the WHO is pursuing. And you could see a lot of these people, a lot of these bureaucrats attend their seminars and their gatherings, and they are like very well organized, while there is no debate about this, what WHO and their backers are doing, because they are, again, New York, you mentioned New York. Bloomberg is heavily financing WHO, and all these efforts through the WHO, which is kind of perceived as a neutral organization, but to me, it's more of a lobbying organization when it comes to regulation of tobacco. But the beneficiaries, as you pointed out, are definitely criminal organizations. Slovenia is on the path of not just tobacco coming through from the Balkans, from Albania, but also, human trafficking and so forth. And it has been proving that illicit trade has gone up every time that, excises would go up, let alone now that we are going to introduce plain packaging, it's going to go even more up. So there are two sides to the story. One is someone who's very pleased by seeing all these regulations, like they feel moral or whatever they feel. They feel they are our parents. They need to tell us how to live our lives. But then there are also those people that are benefiting. But I haven't seen them pushing for such regulations, at least in Slovenia.
Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, it's mainly just sincere fanaticism. You got people like Michael Bloomberg putting huge amounts of money into not only anti-tobacco measures, but anti-sugary drink measures. The WHO are filled with sincere fanatics. There is an interesting kind of conflict of interest when it comes to opposition to e-cigarettes. The pharmaceutical industry had been funding WHO's anti-tobacco programs since the late 90s, since Nicorette patches and gums and so on became popular. And it's fairly obvious why they're doing that. They've also been lobbying harder than anybody against e-cigarettes, particularly at the EU level, for the same reason. These guys are all in the same market. They're all selling nicotine. And in the case of e-cigarettes, they're selling much safer forms of nicotine that help get people off cigarettes. So they are at war there. And with the anti-smoking groups themselves, it's public choice theory. They need to constantly have new dragons to slay. But in America in particular, where the anti-smoking movement is generally very hostile towards e-cigarettes, I suspect that part of that is because the reduced harm nicotine products and e-cigarettes threaten to make anti-smoking groups obsolete, basically. Who needs all these stupid regulations when you have a free market solution?
And even within the different technologies in the e-cigarette zone, there's different factions that will seek to claim that a different technology is less effective in harm reduction and things like that. And so there's an attempt to tax or ban one or the other, and whether it's snus or open systems versus closed systems versus heat not burn. Those are more typical inter-industry fights that go on all the time on all kinds of different issue sets.
Yeah, the future is actually here in Chile right now, where they have taken the plain packaging to an extreme with products that are supposedly aimed at children. And this is cereal boxes, candy, all kinds of things like that, so that cereal boxes no longer have the brands that were the pictures that we're used to. So if the chicken on a cornflakes, the rooster on a cornflakes, gone. Tony Tiger is dead. Captain Crunch is dead. All of these things that, us Americans grew up with are now off the package, and they're now plain packaging. So they've not only taken it at that level, but they put warning labels on it. So those little guys on the M&M things have a black label on them warning people that this is a dangerous product, a harmful product. And all of this is under the auspices of one, controlling obesity or protecting people for that, and also children. And so they have taken it to an incredible extreme. Recently, during Easter, there were bins full of what looked like mummified Easter bunnies because they didn't want them to look attractive to children. So this is how far it's gone. And the WHO is behind a lot of this and pushing this, especially in developing countries where they see an opportunity to put a foothold in there to push their agenda. And it's particularly pernicious. And we've got to step up and stop this, because it's gone way beyond. And they're using all the same tactics that they did for tobacco. They've now just pushed it onto what they call non-communicable diseases. And so they're doing, all of this on our behalf, they say. So, very dangerous.
Chris, did you had something? Okay, over here.
Thank you. Before asking a very critical question, I took the liberty to make a comment inspired by Tanja, who said that although she is not a smoker, she defends the rights of smokers to be in good knowledge with respect to what happens to them. I started a lecture at the university where I teach economics with the following sentence. There is one thing in the world which I hate more than smoking, the prohibition of smoking. Some of my students took a look at me, oh my God, our professor is mentally challenged. But after I've overcome the shock in their eyes, I taught them a lesson on how the universal sense of justice should prevail over the personal sensibility on justice. And in this case, all gets to make sense. I want to dare you with a question regarding intellectual property. At least I think I am a hardcore libertarian. I believe that everything starts and ends with private property rights, bottom line, and non-negotiable sentence. But when coming about intellectual property rights, I play with the minds of my students, asking them the following question. You all know about the famous debate in the libertarian community between Murray Rothbard and Stephen Kinsella with respect to some part of the intellectual property rights, and they're both points of departure when establishing the righteousness or the unrighteousness of intellectual property rights is deriving them from work, from human work. Property is the offshoot of work, of human work and creativity and effort. And the other said, Kinsella, that intellectual property rights starts from scarcity. When establishing intellectual property rights, where by nature there is plentifulness, in the realm of ideas there is plentifulness, this is the stage of nature, in the realm of information of ideas, and you establish scarcity, isn't this against the very sense of political economy and political philosophy, which tries to overcome scarcity, not to add scarcity to our universe? Thank you.
Thanks. Would anyone like to respond to that? I think his point can stand. Any other questions? Okay, if everyone would like to thank our panelists.